This is Build Without Chaos. I'm Colleen Goepfert. One clear idea every episode for operators, founders, and marketers who build with intent. Welcome back to Build Without Chaos. This is a space where we talk with leaders who've seen the inside of scale and choose a different way forward. Today's theme is the operators who opted out, conversations with leaders who left the noise but not the impact. My guest is Andrew Garrihy. Andrew has held senior marketing leadership roles at some of the biggest global brands, Samsung, Huawei, Didi, and today he coaches CMOs around the world. We're going to talk about what it really looks like to step out of the C-suite, what you carry forward, and what you choose to leave behind. Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
Colleen, it's absolutely wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to just start by grounding the listeners in your journey. What first drew you into marketing leadership and what was your path to get there?
Yeah, so I think I started in marketing, obviously. It wasn't in marketing leadership, but I started in marketing because I'd failed at my other careers. So I first decided I wanted to be an actor, realized I couldn't make any money. Then I tried to be a rock star, realized I couldn't make any money. And then I discovered marketing. I thought this is perfect because now I get to be creative and I get to be commercial and I get to make money. And I just loved the way marketing could have a real impact and influence people. But my other passion is communication. The thing that's always made me stand out is my communication. And I've always been fascinated by personal growth and development. And it was really early in my career, I had the gift of being put on a global exec development program. That's where I discovered leadership. And then I got really passionate about that because I could see firsthand the impact truly outstanding leaders could have. And alternatively, the damage bad leaders could do to organizations, but do to individuals. And that's when I started to really get a passion for how could I develop and how could I develop other great leaders? And marketing happened to be my platform.
Yeah. So what stayed consistent about you and your approach? Like you just mentioned that you went through this leadership training.
Mhm.
So even as everything has evolved with brands and geography and culture, because I think you've experienced that a lot with your leadership, what is something that stayed consistent throughout all of that for you?
Yeah. So what stayed really consistent was my greatest strength, which I lent on, especially for my leadership, and that is communication. For me, leadership is all about communication. And that was my single greatest strength. And in fact, it's probably the characteristic of my leadership style, which is really good listening, great, simple communication, but communication that can inspire and influence. Inspire teams, but influence boards, influence C-suite, influence colleagues. And actually, I think we underrate the power of truly great communication. And for me, that's the hallmark of my leadership. That's the first thing. The other thing is that I've learned is just about the power of high performance teams. And I have a model that I've developed over the years, which has 5 C's in it around building high performance teams. And so I think for me, it's the communication. But over time, I developed this framework for really building high performance teams. So it's those two things.
So you've operated at the very highest levels of global marketing.
Mhm.
At what point did you start to feel that tension that maybe staying in the CMO seat long term wasn't something for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it started, um, to be honest, it probably started partway through my tenure at Huawei. So I was at Huawei. I was the chief marketing officer for Western Europe. Then I went on to become chief of brand globally for that business. And not only doing that, but doing it in the midst of an existential crisis. So the company was under attack by the US government. It was having sanctions put against it. It was really difficult. And inside, quite a difficult culture as well. And I remember waking up thinking, I'm just not enjoying this anymore. And I should be, right? I'm leading marketing at brand for about 180 countries. I've got teams of over 200 people. I've got budgets of $500 million. I'm flying over all over the world. I get to be on stages all over the world. I should be really, really happy, but I wasn't. And I couldn't work out why. But why is it just wasn't giving me fulfillment anymore. I was getting lots out of it. My ego was loving it, but personally, it just wasn't fulfilling. And so it was at Huawei it started, and that really set me on a path towards heading towards where I am today.
So that's interesting because when you started mentioning this, I was thinking, okay, maybe you're just burned out. So how did you know that this wasn't something that you just needed to take a year break or maybe a vacation, but this was the start of a deeper decision to shift lanes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be honest, at the time, I don't think, when you're in the middle of that, I don't think we know what burnout looks like, to be honest with you. I think we have symptoms. My symptoms were I just wasn't getting the satisfaction and I was wanting to do other things. And that other thing became coaching and developing people. So the thing I loved about my role, and this started at Huawei, I had teams of people in China and Latin America, and I found myself spending more time coaching. And I loved that. That was giving me such fulfillment. The other parts of my job, the politics, the admin, that sort of stuff wasn't giving me such fulfillment, but the coaching was because I could see the big impact it was having. And then my next role when I went to Didi was the same. Now I was getting to coach people in Latin America and in the Middle East. Again, incredible talent that just wasn't getting it. And that was, again, just telling me I was really fulfilled. Another incredible CMO role, but I wasn't happy. And then my last one with OLX, now I was getting to coach people in India and Indonesia and in Japan and in Eastern Europe. And again, it was the coaching I was loving, not the other parts of my role. So that's the first thing. Over time, I started to see what was attracting me. But to answer your question specifically, I was burned out, but I didn't know it. And what happened is in my last role at OLX, I decided I would take a break. And I decided I would take 12 months off because I could. About 3 months into that, I realized I was burned out. So when I had time to get perspective, when I had time to think about what was a source of energy versus what was taking energy, when I had time to think about my motivation and my source of motivation, actually then when I look back, I realized I was burned out, but I didn't know it in the moment. And actually, then I took 12 months off to really, really take some time for me and think about what I really was going to do next. Would I dive back in or would I try and reinvent myself? Not an easy decision, but that was the thing. So I think the short answer to your question is I didn't know I was burned out until I had time to get some perspective. I just knew I wasn't happy.
Yeah, that makes sense because we're just going and doing the same thing every single day.
Exactly.
So sometimes you don't
Well,
recognize it.
exactly.
So when you took this year off, did you wrestle with the pressure of what's next or the idea of a comeback? I'm assuming people were reaching out to you during this time, wondering what direction you wanted to go.
Yeah, I did. I struggle with it every day. So first I promised I wouldn't do anything for 3 months. I promised myself I wouldn't apply for a job. I wouldn't have networking discussions. I wouldn't do anything for 3 months. Now, when you've prior to that, your entire life is focused on the next step in your career and getting higher and more responsibility and more success. That was really, really difficult. And it would oscillate between moments of sheer exhilaration and freedom and release and almost terror of what if I'm wasting time? What if I'm missing opportunities? What if there's nothing else? So first I took 3 months. That was really, really difficult, both amazing and slightly terrifying. And especially to say no to opportunities that come across your desk. No, I'm not interested. I don't want to have that discussion for at least another 2 months. Um, it's an easy decision to make. It's a difficult decision to stick to.
I agree. So, how did you train yourself to do that in those 3 months? Because you're obviously operating at such a high role, and to just stop and take a step back. Were there any techniques you used? Was it as simple as just kind of training your brain in that moment? How did you actually do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a good question. And I think the honest answer is I focused on other people I care about. So I focused on my family and my partner, and I just committed to doing that. I also decided to really focus on my happiness and my health. And so anytime I started to wobble, I would just check in about had I achieved the other things I wanted to do. So I think the short answer, as I say it out loud, was about setting myself some other objectives to focus on, right? That was my family, my personal well-being, my personal health, and being really committed to those objectives. One of the things I do with my clients, and I did for myself, is a really lovely exercise called the Wheel of Life. And essentially, you, on a circle, you break it into quadrants on all the different dimensions of your life. And you rate each one out of 5. And when I did that, my career was great, but other parts of my life were miserable. And I decided at that age, I didn't want that picture anymore. I wanted to change that picture. And so I think that's where I got the discipline to do that. Still really difficult, but it gave me focus. And again, for someone that was very goal driven, it worked really well for me.
So, once you stepped out of that CMO seat, what carried forward with you from that training and leadership and guidance you were giving others? And what did you intentionally leave behind?
Yeah, that's a big question. Um, First, I think it's a big decision to leave that behind because your ego, at least mine, was
Yeah.
very tied up in my CMO role, right? That brought a lot of power. It brought a lot of status. It was my identity. My work was my identity. And the status I got, and the power I got, and the influence I got, and the recognition I got was tied up in that role. And then to suddenly make a decision, I'm not going to be a CMO anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore in those roles. I'd lost a huge part of my identity. And even though I'd set myself a new direction, it's like a rubber band. I constantly found myself being pulled back to that because you're starting. I'll give you a perfect example. When you're a CMO in that and control budgets, you call somebody or send an email, people respond immediately. Immediately. When you're not, suddenly people don't respond anymore. Right? Suddenly you're begging for attention, you're begging for responses, you're begging for people to pick up the phone. And you have this rapid realization that it wasn't about you, it was about the position you hold. And then when you come to terms with that, that's when I think it becomes incredibly empowering. Because then you let all that go and you get back to what really makes me special. And so, what did I let go? I let go the ego that comes with the role. And I did that by really facing into the fact it wasn't really about me most of the time. It was about the role and the power I held in that role. Now, I built some great networks and some great relationships because of the way I acted in that role. That's what I kept. So I kept my focus on people. I kept my passion for growing and developing people. I kept my focus on communication. I kept my focus on trying to help other people grow and develop because that's what actually fulfilled me. And that's irrespective of role or title. That's just who I am. So yeah, so that's why I let go. Make no mistake, even today, after a year of, my coaching business and being really clear, I still have moments of, gosh, it would just be easier to go back and get another big CMO role because all that would just happen again. But then you got to realize that it's a very transactional thing. And I don't want to live the rest of my life in that transaction. I want to build it for myself based on who I am and what I do. And that's why I moved into coaching.
One of the things you mentioned was influence. So, how do you measure your influence today as a CMO coach versus than when you had that big title?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So the scale does not compare, right? When you've got that title, the scale doesn't compare. But the quality of influence changes a lot, right? A lot of my influence as a CMO was because of what people thought they could get from me in that position of power. It wasn't real influence. It was it was inauthentic attention, I would say. People paid you attention usually because they thought they could get something from you. An agency could get a contract, someone could get a new job, someone might get a promotion. It's about what people could get from you. So your influence was broad because you had a platform and you had a big title and you had influence, but it wasn't very strong and it wasn't very authentic. Now it's so much simpler. My influence is measured by the impact I have on the people I work with. It's not about what I can give from them or what they can get from me. It's about the impact I can have on them. And that's usually about their leadership, their career success, or just their personal well being. And that is so much more valuable to me. And I don't really care about broad influence anymore. It's much more about the quality of influence. And again, in a commercial sense, for my business, that's way more important than having a big platform.
Mm. So, I'm curious, what patterns have you noticed now that you're guiding others through the same high pressure environments that you experienced when you were a CMO?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I see all the time, and I see this as a coach, but I saw this as a global CMO because remember, a lot of my role as a global CMO was coaching my regional marketing leadership or my VPs or my marketing directors, and I see the same thing over and over and over again. And I coach some CEOs as well, and I see it there as well. The first thing is I call it the death spiral of overwhelm. Where I spend a lot of my time when people come to me in crisis, and I've been there myself, is we get overwhelmed. And then instead of stepping back and resetting, we get in this downward death spiral. We get overwhelmed. And then we start making poor decisions. And then we start second guessing ourselves. And then we get more overwhelmed. And then we can't get clarity. And then people lose confidence. And then we lose more confidence. And it gets into this downward spiral of overwhelm. And every time, the key is to step back, to get perspective, and to reset. What is really, really important right now? How am I going to look after myself first and foremost? How can I delegate? How can I get out of this state of overwhelm and get focused? And that's the key, right? So I see this state of overwhelm, and a big part of it is a lack of confidence. And ironically, the highest achievers are often those with the greatest self doubt. And then it's a lack of delegation. I coach some really big CEOs with big portfolios, still can't delegate. And this is a thing that comes back time and time again. So it's a state of overwhelm. It's a lack of self confidence or self doubt, and it's delegation. And the self doubt is a really important thing. We all have self doubt, right? And it will never go away. And it's a good thing, but it's making sure we deal with it and we address it and we recognize it for what it is so that it doesn't become a negative force for us, right? Self doubt can be a brilliant motivator, but you've got to take charge of it and don't let it get out of control. And like I said, it's ironic. Some of the best CMOs or CEOs I coach, they have great self doubt. But the truly outstanding ones have learned to master it and use it as a source of positivity rather than negativity.
mean, if you're going to drop that nugget of goodness, I have to ask, how do you do that? How do you actually channel self doubt for the positive?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not easy. So the first thing is with self-doubt, I use coaching techniques. So the difference between coaching and mentoring, a mentor is like a doctor, right? You go to a doctor, you describe your symptoms based on their experience, they give you a course of action or medication. Do this, come and see me in a week, it should be okay. A coach is different. A coach is like inviting you into a house of mirrors, and they help you get fresh perspective on issues. And self doubt is like that. It's about helping you get really fresh perspective, seeing your self doubt from different perspectives, challenging your beliefs, which may be limiting beliefs. They may actually be just really destructive, untrue beliefs. But it's about using coaching to help you get fresh perspective, to look at it differently. And once you do that, and nearly everybody can break through that, then it changes everything. So it's really about using coaching techniques to drive fresh perspectives and challenge limiting beliefs. And we all have that. And without having someone to talk to, our limiting beliefs become real. And it's perspective that breaks that reality.
I really love this because what I've seen with people with self-doubt, the first thing they tend to do is blame outwards, right? So that's the problem, or this is the problem, or if I fire this person, then it'll be okay. But what you're actually saying is it's taking accountability. It's looking at yourself in the mirror and working through your issues to challenge that self-doubt, and not only challenge it for yourself, but shift it in a way that you can use it in your environment in a positive light.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that brings me to
Yeah.
another point about this. One of the things in coaching that I use a lot is we can't change other people. We can tell them how we'd like, but the only person we can truly change is ourselves. And if you can't do that, good luck trying to fix things. First, change yourself. If you change yourself, you will change the way people react around you. That's where brilliant leadership
Absolutely.
is. It's that awareness and that fresh perspective, and having an honest look at yourself in the house of mirrors is incredibly powerful. Sadly, a lot of leaders are not willing to do that. I was coaching a CMO recently, and often when I coach CMOs, I will also insist on talking to the CEO. And I was coaching a CMO who was having trouble. And the CEO's words to me were, Andrew, I'm the CEO. I don't have to change. Everybody has to work the way I work. I'm the boss. To which my answer was, how's that working out for you? 5 CMOs in less than a year. How's that working out? Right? But it's a perfect example of brilliant leadership versus average leadership, and the impact you get when you can create a high performance culture. And a high performance culture starts with yourself and your own self awareness and your own honesty and being able to really look at yourself in the mirror.
It's a big one.
It is.
So, do you think that's the start of a toxic environment for a company? When you have a C-suite that isn't taking, I don't wanna say accountability, but maybe they're not looking to change.
That's a difficult question. I think it's part of toxicity, right? I think if you've got a C-suite that says everybody else is wrong and it's my way or the highway, I think that's a problem, right? Because you're not one of the key to a really great high performance culture is diversity of thought, right? It's the single greatest source of competitive advantage is diversity of thought. If you've got a C-suite that's saying it's my way or the highway and I'm not open to change, you might get some success in the short term, but when things get tough, you will really struggle because it'll become a low trust environment. It'll become a blame culture. It's just a negative spiral. If you can't create a high performance culture where people feel empowered, where there's no fear, where they can openly communicate, where they can challenge, then I think you've got a problem. And I think part of it comes with self-awareness, and honesty, right? Honestly, half of the problems I see in toxic cultures is you've got a C-suite that lacks self-confidence, won't admit it, won't lead into it, try to project this aura of they know everything and they're perfect and everyone else is useless. It's no surprising it becomes toxic. Think about the message that's sending to everybody in that organization. So I guess long answer to your very succinct question, yes.
We're going deep, but I appreciate it. So I want to bring it back to some patterns and pitfalls that you see with CMOs. What are some common red flags with CMOs that are just on the edge of chaos and they need your help? Like they're calling you and it's right there.
Yeah, it's almost always when they call me. So I work with three types of CMO. I work with the CMOs who have just got their first CMO role, and they are usually quite overwhelmed when they call me. So they've spent their whole career trying to get this job. They finally got the big job, full of self-doubt, totally overwhelmed. They've never been the one for whom the buck finally stops with. Imposter syndrome is usually off the charts, totally overwhelmed. So that's the first one. And it's usually overwhelm and self-confidence. The second one is the other end of the spectrum, someone who's been really high performing, but for some reason or another is now getting real pressure for their performance. Same thing, overwhelm, imposter syndrome, lost perspective. And then I have the ones in the middle who are doing brilliantly and just understand the value of having a coach and a partner that can give them perspective and honest, unfiltered feedback. So to answer your question, the two things I see on the two ends of the scale where it's in crisis is a sense of overwhelm. Self-doubt has really taken hold. Fear has taken hold. And because of that, they've just got a lack of clarity, an absolute lack of clarity. And that actually accentuates the decline. It's that death spiral. I'm not clear. I've got more self-doubt. I can't really get clear on where I should put my attention, what the big problems are. I'm second guessing myself. Others now are starting to second guess me. And it just gets into this death spiral. So if I could give people any feedback, it is learn what the flags are for when you're starting to get overwhelmed. What are the telltale signs when you're getting overwhelmed? Learn what your flags are. For me, I know I'm getting overwhelmed when I start snapping at people or behaving a bit aggressive, right? When I otherwise wouldn't. I'm like, okay, that's a bit of an emotional response. What's going on? Oh my God, I'm a bit overwhelmed. So, first, what are your flags to say it's happening? And then have a strategy to get yourself out of it. Talk to somebody, tell them what's going on. Just talking about stuff is incredibly powerful. Then get really clear on what your priorities are. What is the absolute one or two things that I need to focus on to fix this problem, and deprioritize everything else? This is the delegation piece. And then look for constant support, and then look after yourself is so critical. Make time for yourself. Because when people get into that overwhelm and that death spiral, then they start neglecting their own well-being, and that makes it even worse. So short answer to your question, the thing I see constantly is overwhelm. Self-doubt are the two that come in, and then that just leads to a litany of other issues.
Your perspective is gold because what I'm picking up here is what you're saying isn't just about CMOs. I think it's about operators across the
It
board.
is.
Everyone can feel like this at some point. So, my next question is for leaders still in the thick of it, they're right in the middle of everything you're talking
Mhm.
about. What practices would you suggest for protecting clarity in these high pressure environments?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think right now, especially now in the world right now, I think there's two incredibly important skills to have. There's communication, the other is resilience. And that's it, because in business, we've got a world we've never seen before. right? We have a new technology, AI, that is changing everything. We've got an economic environment across the entire world that is declining. We've got companies cutting costs everywhere. And then we've got a world order that's changing. Whether we like it or not, the world order is not the way it used to operate before. So we've got so many challenges right now that if you're in leadership, it's coming at you from everywhere. So there's two things that are critical. Communication, being able to communicate with your stakeholders, be it your board or your C-suite or the team you lead, with absolute clarity, is more critical than ever before because there's so much confusion. So communication, communication, communication. The other one is resilience. Resilience is so important now. And my definition of resilience is about how to turn great adversity into personal growth, right? It's not just being tough and toughing it through. How do you turn really great adversity into personal growth? They are the two critical things. I have a framework on resilience, which is, I call it the press M model. It starts with pause and acknowledge the stress, which I've talked about, reframe it with meaning. And this is really, really powerful. I learned this from Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist that survived 3 concentration camps, including Auschwitz. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And the entire premise of the book is you can survive anything if you can find meaning in your suffering. And I've been through some huge existential crises in marketing and leadership. And that's exactly what I did. Reframe the meaning. And mine was serving the people that I lead. And that gave me so much motivation and resilience. So pause and acknowledge, find meaning in it, evaluate and prioritize, delegate and prioritize, really look at who can support you, ask for help, and then look after yourself, right? So communication and resilience, and follow that simple model. If people could just do more of that, we'd have way more successful companies and much happier individuals, both at leadership, but also the people they lead.
I feel like you're giving life advice. Like, we're talking about company advice, but I'm like, "Wow, we could apply this to our daily
I
life,"
agree. I
'cause
agree.
here's the thing, this is just managing chaos in general if you are not working or working. Like you mentioned, we live in a very chaotic world right now.
It's
So,
it's true, but I think isn't that interesting? Because what is the difference between our working life and our personal life? They shouldn't be that dramatically different. The fact that they are is what creates the conflict internally, right? If you can be so balanced and centered at work, it should feel effortless, right? But you need some of these things to make sure you keep that balance. Otherwise, it gets out of control. And it's the same in our personal life.
yeah, absolutely. So, I'd love to ask you, what's one piece of advice you'd give a VP who's aspiring and eyeing that CMO role today? Because let's be honest, we haven't really pitched this CMO role like it's glamour, right? There's a lot that comes with it. So, what is something that you would give some advice to a VP?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've got two pieces of advice. One, be really clear on why you're doing it, right? Because it's not an easy role. And yes, don't get me wrong, it can be amazing. And if you want power and influence and accountability, it can be amazing, but it's not easy. So be clear on why you're doing it, because there's lots of good, there can be lots of bad, and it can be quite detrimental. So first be clear on why you're doing it. And I'll be honest, I wasn't in the early days. I wanted it for power and money and influence. And then I got it and realized that's not so much fun. The money bit's great, the other bit's not so much. But when I started thinking about it as an ability to lead and grow people and grow companies through my influence, that was different. It gave me a very different point of focus. So first thing is be clear on what you're doing. The second thing is understand what you're doing. When I was a CMO, probably 50% of my role was corporate politics, 30% was coaching, 10% was strategy, and then the last bit was kind of operations. There's no marketing anymore. No marketing, right? So be very clear about what the role actually will be, right? Because when you get to a CMO, your performance is it's the how your growth comes through the people you lead, right? So it's performance through others. And that's a really, really critical change to make. The other thing as a CMO, you're not a marketing expert anymore. You're a C-suite leader, and you now need to act as a cross-functional C-suite leader who just happens to have accountability for marketing. That's a huge change, and it's the single biggest change that most people struggle with when they go from VP to CMO. And I can't tell you how many conversations I have with CEOs who say, they're just not making the transition. I need them to be a C-suite leader. And then I talk to the CMO and they're like, but I'm a CMO. I'm like, yeah, the giveaway's in the name. C. You're now a C-suite leader who happens to have accountability for marketing, but you've got to operate right across the business. If you're not willing to do that, don't go for that role. So that's the first piece of advice. Be clear on why you're doing it. Understand what it's likely to entail and the changes it's going to require. The second thing is right now, really develop your communication skills. The world is more complicated and more fragmented than ever before. Honestly, it belongs to the best communicators, and build your resilience. Otherwise, you're going to struggle.
So let's bring it back to the heart of the podcast. If you think about leaders who truly build without chaos, from your perspective, what does leading without chaos feel like?
It feels effortless. It feels effortless because, and I'm not saying chaos doesn't exist. Chaos exists everywhere. It's how do we respond to the chaos, right? We can't control the world around us. The world around us can create chaos in an instant, but it's about how do you respond to the chaos. If you've built a high performance culture, if you've really taken the time to understand yourself, to build resilience so you can respond to what happens in a positive way, that feels effortless. When you look at a great sports person, look at a great basketballer or a footballer, they're surrounded by chaos that they can't control.
Right.
But they've built their response muscles so good. They know themselves, they know their strengths, they know the strengths of their team. And you hear them talk about being in the zone because it's how you respond to chaos. So great leadership without chaos just feels effortless because it's not about trying to remove the chaos. It's about changing the way you respond to the chaos.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's really what life is about in general, inside and outside of the
I
workplace.
agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And one of the things when I coach CMOs or leaders is when they're in overwhelm, we start with very simply that. What are the things we can actually control? Because there's so much we can't control. So let's just start by focusing on the things we control. And then it does become like a muscle. You get a bit more confidence. You start to control that. And actually, your sphere of control slowly starts to engage. And it's ironic because the less effort you put into trying to change the world around you, the more you can change it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's nowhere else to go but end from that note because we have had a very profound discussion today. And I just want to thank you for joining me. I think this has been a very powerful look at what it means to leave the noise, but also keep an impact. And I sincerely appreciate your time.
Thank you, Colleen. I really appreciate it. And again, thank you for having me. I thank you for the opportunity to share some of my thinking and some of the insights into how I work. I just hope it helps some of your listeners. So thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Build Without Chaos. If today's episode resonated, subscribe and share it with someone else who's building without chaos.